those who are here today, I want to give a big shout out to Fulbright and the United States of Education Foundation Pakistan, as well as Dr. Khan, to be on board with us on conducting a series of 6 talks that are focused on academicians. The reason we started Academics Accessible just recently was because we wanted cross-cultural public scholarship, and by public scholarship we mostly mean scholarships as in helping out individuals with their financial issues at the universities. But by public scholarship I mean bringing academicians and bringing new knowledge out of the confined spaces of the universities to people like you who are gathered here today because they want to learn something. They want to learn something new and they want to improve their lives. So this is one of our core missions, to improve the lives of people through knowledge, through the exchange of academic knowledge. And under this, we are not only offering talks, but we are also offering courses that are philosophically and so psychologically inclined. There are courses on self-development, self-enhancement, as well as workshops that are related to stuff like parenting, for example, or body language or emotional intelligence. We're also having reading logs in which we select a book, mostly non-fiction, and we try to read it together, try to understand it together, and create an environment of higher education, a continuous program of higher education. And that is the aim of Academic Accessible. Today, for that reason, we have Dr. Chris with us. The last time I was teaching at FC, I had my students, I made a course on the philosophy of happiness, and it was inspired by his course that he taught at the University of Colorado. And by the end of our class, we invited him to, come on Skype, and it was like, it was raining and nothing was working, and we were like, oh my god, what's happening? But we had that experience, and I'm so thankful that he is here today again with us. Before I hand it over to Dr. Chris, I want to also comment on the fact that today we see that people are getting into depression and anxiety day by day, and those numbers are increasing to the amount that we cannot perceive. Whether it's Pakistan or whether it's abroad, whether it's a celebrity or a teenager or a model, people are killing themselves because they cannot handle the stress, they cannot handle the anxiety, they cannot handle the pressure that the society is giving to us. And this is why we have arranged this talk on the philosophy of well-being and happiness, and Professor Chris is going to go through the handout that I've already distributed to you all guys, with you to understand that not just the idea of happiness, but what are the ways that we can seek happiness, how can we put those theories that we talk about in the textbooks in our lives and make our lives better. How can we avoid being unhappy? How can we choose? What are our options of choosing happiness? And how can we choose to live a life that is better, that is more fulfilling, and which brings us well-being? So we're going to have an Eastern and a Western perspective exchange as well, and I hope you come up with good questions. Dr. Chris, now it's up to you, and the audience is yours, and I wish you good luck for your talk.
Thank you, Anam, for inviting me for this. It's a real treat. I've never been to Pakistan before. I would have loved to be there in person. That isn't as easy to do, but it's just great that we can at least do it this way. And thanks for being here. I know you probably have had a full day already, and so I appreciate your spending your evening here. thanks also for letting me give my talk in English. It's the only language I know how to speak, and philosophy is hard enough for me in the language I'm most familiar with, and so it's I know it might make things even more difficult, and I appreciate it. One other thing I want to say is that I have a speech impediment. I stutter, so I get stuck on my words. So you'll hear that, and it probably isn't the Skype malfunctioning. It's probably me malfunctioning, but it'll be okay. And before I start, one last thing. What should we do about the time? Should I cut the talk a little shorter because we started late? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay to proceed as I was planning, but I don't know if people have to leave at a certain time or what. Okay, thank you. Sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about the philosophy of well-being, and it's the main thing I think about in philosophy. And by the way, if as I'm speaking, if the connection is poor, or you need me to speak louder or more slowly, please interrupt me. All right, so a great old question we ask in philosophy, and many people just ask themselves, is what is the good life? It's hard to imagine a more important question. I think the question of well-being is a narrower question than that. And that's because there are features of a life that can make it a better life to live, but that aren't necessarily of any benefit to the person living it. And I think the question of well-being, or at least the question I'm talking about tonight, is about benefit and harm. So, for example, a life that exhibits moral virtue, or a life that is meaningful, those are ways that a life can be a better life to live, but it need not, in my view, be of any benefit. It can be that when you do the right thing, and so, enhance the moral value of your life, it actually was a harm to you. I think that can happen. And it might be, and I think it is, that you if it's the right thing, you still ought to do it, even though it wasn't in your own interest. But I'm just trying to emphasize that I'm talking here about self-interest, and I'm not talking about all the other ways in which a life might be a good life. Another important distinction I want to draw to clarify the question I'm talking about is that between what we can call intrinsic value and instrumental value. So if we ask if we ask about the quality of life, and we want to know what things improve the quality of a person's life, we're probably asking about instrumental value. That is, we're probably thinking of what things tend to cause a person's life to be improved. So, we might ask, is all this technology in our lives actually making our lives better? And there we're asking, I think, whether this technology causes improvements in our lives. And that's a great question, but I'm asking a different one. I don't want to know what things cause us to be better off. Well, I do want to know that, but that's a question I'm not talking about today. Today, I'm talking about what things in themselves make us better off. And that's a more fundamental question. Because if you want to know what things cause you to be better off, you need to know what they're causing that make you better off. So I put the question in 3 different ways in the middle of page 1 of the handout in italics. What things in themselves make a person better off? What things are intrinsically good for people? What things are of intrinsic benefit to people? And these are different ways of asking what I call the philosophical question of well-being. The talk is, the question is of practical significance, but this talk is purely theoretical. So actually, I don't have any practical advice to talk about today about how we improve our lives. Instead, I'm asking the much more abstract question about what is it for a life to be better? Okay, so now we've got an understanding of our question. How do we go about answering it? One way is to devise a list of things, come up with a list of things whose presence in our lives seems intuitively to make our lives better. So I have in the middle of page 1 a list of things that they seem good to get: happiness, knowledge, love, freedom, friendship, the appreciation of beauty, creative activity, being respected. These are things that most of us want in our lives. And it seems rational to want them. And we often want them in themselves and not just for what else they can get us. And so that is evidence that they are good in themselves for us. Theories that of well-being, which are theories that try to identify the basic goods in life. Theories of well-being that put forth a list like this are called objective list theories, and I'll explain a bit more about that term objective in a little bit. Okay, so I think that's a good start. But now I want to ask a question, which I think when we think about it, it will pull us in a different direction towards the view that the items on our list here, or at least some of them, aren't good in themselves for us, but only a good in relation to other things. Here's the question I want to ask, which I'm calling a Socratic question, because the philosopher Socrates, ancient Greek philosopher, asked an analogous question, but not about well-being. He was asking it about piety or morality. But our question is well-being. And here's the question. Do we want the things above in our lives because it's good to have them? Or is it good to have them because we want them? So to put the question a little differently, do the items here improve our lives no matter how we feel about them, or do they improve our lives only if we want them? So subjectivists about well-being, and here I'm reading from near the bottom of page 1, they hold that something we get in life benefits us when and only when we have an interest in it, or we want it, or we have some other positive attitude towards it, or it causes us to get something else that we have or will have a positive attitude towards. So here, for subjectivists, benefit is fundamentally connected to positive attitudes on the part of the person who's benefited. That's the core of subjectivism about well-being. The main alternative view is objectivism, and objectivists about well-being hold that at least some of the intrinsically beneficial things in our lives are good for us, even if we don't want them or like them or care about them. So that's the debate between objectivism and subjectivism about well-being is one of the central debates about well-being. One thing I want to mention is we shouldn't confuse it with an analogous debate in ethics about right and wrong, because there are these two views in ethics. In my view, a morality or ethics is objective. So, for example, it's wrong to light a cat on fire for your amusement. I believe that. And I believe that it's wrong no matter what you think of it, even if you want to do that, or if everyone wants to do that, it's still wrong. So wrongness does not depend on our disapproving of the act. If it's wrong, It's wrong no matter what we think. That's my view in ethics. However, my view in well-being is the opposite. I'm a subjectivist about well-being. So it seems to me that if you give a person a thing in their life and they just aren't into it at all, they're completely unimpressed, they're left cold by it, it's of no benefit to them. All right. So if that's true, I think that's a basic truth about well-being, and there probably isn't a more basic truth from which I can argue for it. But one way to argue for it is indirectly, by imagining an example that will, I hope, elicit a reaction in you that supports this principle that you can be benefited by a thing only if it connects with your positive attitudes. So here is my example. It's in the middle of page 2 on the handout. It's called The Case of Yasmin. So I'm going to read it. Yasmin wants to improve her quality of life. She's heard that it's philosophers who claim to be experts on this topic, so she looks through some philosophy journals at her library. She finds an article claiming to have discovered the correct account of well-being. That's what we're trying to do here. It's an objective theory that includes the item above, the item from page 1 of the handout on our list. The paper's in a pretty good journal, so she just decides to go about trying to increase her share of some of the items on the list. For example, to increase her freedom, Yasmin moves to an area with higher speed limits for driving. But she's careful to make sure that the move won't have any detrimental side effects. It won't cause her to fail to get any of the items that are good according to this theory. Okay. She succeeds in increasing her freedom in this way, but she finds that she doesn't care about it. She's completely indifferent. Although she's free to drive faster, she never does. She never wants to, nor does the freedom to drive faster get her anything else in life that she's interested in. She considers whether she's any better off as a result of the increase in her freedom, and she concludes that she's no better off. So, first thing I want us to do is just to imagine that example. Think about the fact that her freedom was increased, and think about whether you think it was of any benefit to her. This freedom that had no other effect on her life, and that she didn't care about. I hope you agree with me. I hope you have the intuition about this example, that this increase in her freedom was of no benefit to her. Well, if that's true, then that suggests that freedom itself doesn't improve a person's life. That is, freedom on its own. Of course, freedom often improves our lives through its effects. Like, for example, we often want it, and so we're getting something we want. But I'm trying to isolate the question of whether freedom itself is any improvement, and I think this example suggests that it isn't. And if that's true, then the objective list theory, the one that included all those items on the list, that view is mistaken, because that view says freedom is good in itself. Importantly, and here I'm on the last bullet point under item A on page 2 of the handout. Importantly, the point generalized for any of the alleged goods on Are we back on? Can you hear me? Okay. I think we got a little bit of a little stuck there, but I think we're okay now. Okay. I was saying that our point about freedom generalizes. So for any of the items on that list, as long as it's an objective, putative good, that is a putative good that bears no necessary connection to a person's positive attitudes, we could construct an example analogous to the case of Yasmin that suggests that that item isn't good in itself. We could construct an example involving a person who gains some knowledge that they're not interested in, and that doesn't get them anything else that they're interested in. And I think we would have the reaction that it is of no benefit. Now, that isn't true for all the items on that list. If you look back on page 1, one of the items is happiness. And happiness is itself a positive attitude, being happy. And so you can't make a person happy without increasing their positive attitudes, right? So that is, if it's a good, we call that a subjective good because it's connected to their positive attitudes. And the argument I'm presenting here wouldn't show that happiness isn't good in itself, but it would show that, for example, freedom and knowledge and any other item that it isn't connected to our positive attitudes by definition is not good in itself. Okay, so I've been explaining why I am a subjectivist about well-being. I now want to say, but you might wonder why anyone is then attracted to objectivism, the view that there are goods unconnected to our positive attitudes. I think and so I'm going to talk a bit about that. I think one of the main reasons that some people are driven to reject subjectivism about well-being is that intuitively it's possible for a person to want or like or care about getting the wrong things. So to illustrate this, well, so for example, some people want things that seem pointless or trivial. Like, for example, some people think that playing video games all day is like a pointless existence. And that, you know, and that's an interesting question. But the argument for objectivism about well-being might be even stronger if we imagine choices that aren't pointless but are positively bad. So I want us to consider the case of Ted Bundy. And now I'm at the top of page 3. Ted Bundy was a real-life serial rapist and murderer in the United States. It's true. So what Bundy wanted most in his life was to inflict pain on innocent strangers, to wield power over them, and to watch them beg, suffer, and die at his own hand. And for quite a number of years, he got exactly what he wanted. So about Bundy, subjectivists have to say that he benefited greatly in doing what he did, that he was quite well off, at least before he got caught. So just to be clear, a subjectivist about well-being can say that what he did was morally terrible, which of course it was, but they have to say it was no harm to him, and in fact, it was quite in his interest to do it. What he did, he got a good life for him, at least up until when he got caught. But objectivists, they can condemn his behavior not only morally, but from the point of view of his own self-interest. So they could say Bundy would have been better off if he had wanted different, better things and gotten those instead of wanting the bad things that he got. And so you need to, so it's up to each of us to think about this example and think, did Bundy get a good life doing the terrible things that he did? My own view is yes, he did. I think because he got exactly what he wanted, and it had no bad side effects for him, at least up until when he got caught. What he did promoted his own self-interest. And I don't think that's a bitter pill to swallow. I think on reflection, to me, that's a plausible view about the example. You may or may not agree, but I'll add one last thing in support of subjectivism. I think subjectivists can explain something that objectivists can't, that we find the Bundy situation really sickening and outrageous. And the reason we do, I think, is that he's doing these terrible things all the while living well. So he's getting a good life and doing terrible things. He doesn't deserve to get a good life, and yet he does. And so subjectivists can appeal to that to explain why the situation is especially outrageous. But objectivists don't think he benefited, and so he didn't get a good life, and they can't appeal to that to explain why this situation is so outrageous. Okay. And now we're on to section 4. The desire satisfaction theory of well-being. Subjectivists, as we've seen, maintain that being well off has to do with how we feel about what we get in life as opposed to the nature of what we get. And but what attitude or feeling are they going to appeal to? One of the most standard ones for them to appeal to is the attitude of desire or wanting. And in fact, a desire or wanting might be an element in every positive attitude that we get. It might be an element in liking and preferring and caring about. And so I think it's a plausible candidate for the attitude that a subjectivist ought to appeal to, and that's the view that I take. And so this leads us to this theory of well-being. And it says here in the middle of page 3 that human welfare consists in the satisfaction of desire. Whenever what a person wants to be the case is the case, that constitutes a benefit for them. And whenever their desires are frustrated, that constitutes a basic harm. And there are no other basic sources of benefit and harm. And then you might ask, well, how good is it for you when you get what you want on this view? And a standard answer is that is determined by the strength of your desire. So if there's something you strongly want to be the case, and it is the case, that's a pretty good benefit for you. If you have a mild desire for something and you get it, that's still a benefit, but only a minor benefit. And then on this view, how well your life goes overall for you is just a function of the extent to which you get what you want in your life, both on a day-to-day basis and with respect to larger life goals. So the life that's high and well being is the life in which you get what you want. Now I want to explain a distinction among kinds of desire that I think is important for this view, and because I think the view ought to appeal only to one kind. So on the one hand, we can desire something in a merely behavioral sense, and that we're disposed to act so as to try to get it. So if we voluntarily do an act, it follows that we wanted to do it on this sense. However, doing it might not actually be attractive to you, or it might not hold any appeal for you. And in that case, I think that's of no benefit to you. And I think there's another kind of desire where when we say you want the thing, what we mean is that it genuinely appeals to you, or that you're genuinely attracted towards it. And it's only in that sense of desire that I think it's a benefit to you to satisfy a desire. And so here, as I've stated on the handout, I'm talking about the distinction between desiring in a merely behavioral sense and desiring in what I'll call the genuine attraction sense. And I have a check mark there to indicate that it's only in that genuine attraction sense that I think is relevant to well-being. Okay, so that was all in the service of clarifying the view. Now I want to take a detour and ask, what about pleasure and happiness? So one of the oldest views of well-being, which we've yet to discuss, is called hedonism. And it's the view that pleasure is the only thing that's intrinsically good to get. At least that's a very compact statement of the view. Now, that view is controversial in part because it says it's the only good thing in life. But I don't want to talk about that, but I just want to talk about the view that it's at least a good thing. It's a good thing to get pleasure or enjoyment. That seems, at least if the pleasure isn't malicious or something, that seems hard to deny. Can a desire satisfaction theory of well-being accommodate that fact? My view is that whether it can and whether it should depends upon what pleasure is. So on one view of the nature of pleasure, pleasure is an indefinable feeling or sensation. So as an analogy, imagine, for example, the taste of chocolate. Or imagine the feeling of nausea. Probably if you meet someone who hasn't experienced either of these, you can't really explain what the experience is like. They're indefinable. I mean, I guess for chocolate you could say it tastes sweet, but then we could just ask, well, what is it for something to taste sweet? And that is ineffable. You can't get that across to anyone who hasn't experienced it. So on this view of pleasure, pleasure is a feeling like that. It's got its own quality, and you can't, and we're all acquainted with it because we've all experienced it, I assume, but you can't explain it. Okay. If that is what pleasure is, then I don't think a desire satisfaction theorist of well-being is able to accommodate the view that that experience is good to get. However, that's okay, because I don't think it is good in itself to get, if that's what it is. So here I'm now at the top of the last page 4. And the reason I don't think that pleasure is good in itself to get, if that's what it is that imagine a creature who gets that experience, but they're completely indifferent to it. They're not interested in it at all. They could take it or leave it. Or worse, imagine a creature who is averse to what that experience is like. They don't want to get it. It's implausible to hold that experience, nonetheless, is still good for them to get. So if that's what pleasure is, it's not a good in itself to get. It's good in itself. It's good to get only if you want it. All right. On another view of the nature of pleasure, for an experience to be a pleasant experience just is for us to want to be experiencing it as we're experiencing it. So chocolate, that experience is pleasant for you only if you want to be experiencing it. If you don't like chocolate, then it's not pleasant. I think if this is what pleasure is, and it is always good to get, but a desire view of welfare is able to explain that fact. And the explanation of why it's good to get is because you get it only if you're wanting it. Otherwise, it wouldn't count as pleasure. And I think the desire theory of happiness is able to accommodate the irresistible idea that it's good to be happy in this same way. So I'm happy that I'm living in Colorado. That's where I live. And I think it's good to have that experience of being happy. But I think what it is to be happy that I live in Colorado is for me to be aware that I live here and to want to live here. If I didn't want to live here, I wouldn't count as being happy that I live here. So in this same way, happiness includes in its nature a desire. And so a desire view of welfare in that way is able to explain why it's good to be happy. Okay. I am going to move on to discussing two possible problems for a desire theory, only one of which I think is actually a problem. Okay, so I'm starting with the problem of ill-informed desires. Sometimes we desire things, and our desire is based on ignorance of what we're desiring. And if we weren't ignorant, if we knew all the facts, we wouldn't want it. So, for example, the cherry pie. Suppose there's a cherry pie before me, and I really want to eat some of it. But suppose, unbeknownst to me, I recently developed a severe allergy to cherries. If I eat the pie, I'll have a terrible allergic reaction. I'll be ill for days. I'll have to go to the hospital. It clearly wouldn't be a good thing for me to eat the pie. I want to eat the pie. So the desire view of well-being, which says it's good for you when you get what you want, seems to have to say it would be a good thing for me to eat the pie. So that seems like a problem for the theory. A popular solution among advocates of the desire theory. Hold on, my earbuds just went out. Okay. Okay, I think I'm back on. Can you hear me? Excellent. Okay. I was saying that popular reaction to this example is that the desire view should say, okay, you're right. It's not if you get what you actually want that always benefits you, but it's if you get what you would want if you knew all the facts. We call this idealization. And so this this view, it's still a desire view, but it appeals not to what you actually want, but only to what you would want if you had full information. This view appears to avoid the problem regarding the cherry pie. It wouldn't imply that I benefit from eating the pie because presumably I wouldn't want to eat the pie if I knew all the facts. And so if I eat it, I wouldn't satisfy a fully informed desire. So I wouldn't benefit on this view. That's true, and that's good, but this view, this move to ideal desires, has its own problems. It abandons, I think, the core idea of subjectivism, that it's you who determine your well-being through your desires, and not through what anyone else wants for you, or even through what you would want if you were different. And one way to see why this is a problem is to note this. It might be true of you, let's take me. It might be true of me that if I if I had full information and I knew everything about everything, I would want different things. Maybe I would want to eat caviar and listen to experimental music. Instead, as I actually am, I want to eat peanuts and watch baseball. This idealization view seems to imply that that we benefit more if we make me eat caviar and listen to strange music, even though I don't want to do that. So it's dictating for me what is good for me, independent of what I actually want, and that seems to be a mistake. But there's good news. I think the original view, our original desire view that appealed to our actual desires, that view is able to handle the example of the cherry pie after all. Here's how it works. We have to distinguish between getting a benefit when we do something and getting an overall benefit. My theory of welfare implies that if I eat this pie, I get a benefit. And that seems plausible because I want it. I really want to eat it, and I eat it, and I'll be wanting to eat it as I eat it, and I'll love it. But eating the pie will have these other side effects. It'll make me ill, and I won't want to be ill. It'll put me in the hospital. I won't want to be in the hospital. It'll prevent me from doing things that I want to do. So my view can agree that overall it's a harm to me to eat the pie, because overall there are more desires frustrated if I eat the pie than if I don't. And that's how it can avoid that problem. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to another objection to the desire satisfaction theory that I think is more of a problem, and it requires modifying the view. I'll just read the example, which is presented by this philosopher from England, Derek Parfit. He says, suppose I meet a stranger who has what is believed to be a fatal disease. My sympathy is aroused, and I strongly want this stranger to be cured. We never meet again. Later, unknown to me, the stranger is cured. On the unrestricted desire fulfillment theory, that's the theory that I like and that we've been discussing. This event is good for me and makes my life go better. But that, he says, isn't plausible. We should reject that theory. So, right, there's a stranger I meet. I want them to be cured. I forget about them and I move on with my life. They are cured. So that's a thing I wanted. It comes about. The desire theory thus has to say that it's a benefit to me. But intuitively, it doesn't seem like I benefit in this example. The stranger benefits, he's cured, but it doesn't seem like I benefit. A common response, and this is the response that a Parfit likes, is to restrict the view so we don't count all our desire satisfactions towards our well-being. We count only those that are about our own lives. So when I want the stranger to be cured, that's a desire about him, not about me or my own life. And we exclude the desires about others. So that's why it's of no benefit. But that's interesting, but I don't think that solution is good. I think it excludes too much. So, for example, maybe there's a sports team that you love. Maybe in football. And when your team wins and it's what you want, and you love it, I think that's a benefit for you that your team won. However, this theory would have to exclude that because it's desire not about you or your own life, but about your team. So I prefer a different solution to this example of the stranger. I think that to be benefited, we must be aware that we have gotten what we want. So the reason Parfit doesn't benefit when the stranger is cured is that he's unaware of that. And a note with the example of a sports team, when your team wins and you're aware of it, on my view, you do benefit, and that's the right result. Now, this raises a lot of questions, this awareness restriction, and we can talk about that if you want, but I think I should wrap up here. So I'm just going to summarize the main ideas I tried to get across. So my question, I try to say, is only the question of benefit and harm, and so narrower than the question of what is the good life. I argued that subjectivism about well-being is more plausible than objectivism, and I appealed to the case of Yasmin in doing this. The version of subjectivism I like is the desire satisfaction theory. I think this theory can accommodate and explain the value of pleasure and happiness. I said the problem of ill-informed desire, as presented with the example of the cherry pie, is no problem for this view. The problem of remote desires, that was the problem of the stranger who had the disease. That is a problem for the view as originally stated, but we can solve that by appeal to awareness, by being aware that you're getting what you want, and that's what the view ought to appeal to. Thank you for listening and for being here.
And thank you for joining us today. I know it's a Tuesday, it's a working day. Everybody has to go work tomorrow. Thank you very much for coming. And it was a great pleasure having you all. Thank you.